The wind that morning came off the desert, and it carried dust. In the crowd going out through the western gate of Jerusalem, there was a woman nobody looked at twice. No rank, no escort, no name that anyone in that street would have recognized. Middle 40s, undyed wool, her head covered, one more face in a festival city full of strangers. She was walking out to watch her son be executed, and she would not be able to do one single thing about it. Now, almost everything you think you know about that afternoon comes from paintings, where she stood, what she could see, what she was allowed to do with his body afterwards. It does not come from the text, and the text is worse. Her name was Mary. She was from Nazareth, a village in Galilee so small that people used it as a punchline, and she was almost certainly a widow. Joseph vanishes from the record entirely after one episode in the temple when the boy was 12, and the town had taken to calling her son the Son of Mary, which, in a world that named men after their fathers, is the phrase people use when the father is dead. She had raised him in a house of stone and packed earth, on barley bread and lentils and salted fish from the lake. And now she was walking out of Jerusalem in festival traffic toward a low ridge of abandoned quarry outside the wall, where the Romans did their killing beside a road so that everyone going past would see. And here is the first silence of this story, and it is one that almost nobody notices. We do not know when she found out. Somewhere in the dark, in a garden outside the city they had taken him, there had been a trial or something shaped like one. By the time the sun came up, it was already finished, and a Roman governor had already signed. And not one of the 4 Gospels tells us where Mary was that night, or who came to find her, or what words they used, or how long it took. She simply appears, already outside the wall, already walking, already too late. Whatever it is to be woken with that news, she had it, and nobody wrote it down. The Gospels do not tell us what she was thinking. They will not give her a word to say for the rest of the day. This is the story of the hours she spent there. What she could see, what she could hear, and what she was not able to do. One honest note about the clock before we go. Mark puts the crucifixion at the 3rd hour, roughly 9 in the morning, and the death at the 9th, roughly 3 in the afternoon. 6 hours. John does not agree. He has Jesus still standing in front of Pilate at about midday. Both cannot be right, and I am not going to pretend they can. But here is what matters more, and we will come back to it. The Gospels never once put a clock on Mary. They tell us how long the execution lasted. They never tell us how long she stood there. The man who held the power of the sword in Judea was the prefect Pontius Pilate, not a name argued over by scholars, because in 1961, an Italian excavation at Caesarea turned up a block of limestone with his name and his title carved into it. He was real, he was there, and Passover was exactly the week a Roman governor came up to Jerusalem, because Passover was exactly the week revolts began, which is the coldest fact in this whole story. Her son died in the spring, in a crowd, beside a road, because Rome was nervous. A nervous empire kills early, and it kills where people can see. The year was most probably AD 33, though historians dispute it, and the year 30 remains a serious alternative. We will use 33, and we will not pretend the question is closed. But before we follow her out to the ridge, you need to know who this woman actually was, because the version most of us carry in our heads is a statue, and the woman in the text is not a statue. Start with her voice. The longest speech Mary is given anywhere in the New Testament is a song, and it is not a gentle one. In Luke's opening chapter, she sings about a God who brings down the mighty from their thrones and lifts up the humble, who fills the hungry and sends the rich away empty. That is not a woman who accepts the world as it is. That is a revolutionary hymn, and she is the one singing it. Now hold that song in your mind and look at where she is standing today, beneath a Roman execution rack, at the pleasure of a Roman governor, on the authority of a high priest. She sang that the thrones would fall. The thrones are doing very well. Second, she has done this before. Matthew tells us that when her son was small, a king wanted him dead, and she carried him out of the country. She has already once put her body between this child and a man with the power to kill him, and she won. Today there is no border to cross and nowhere to run. Third, and this is the part almost nobody tells you, she once tried to stop him. Mark records a day, early in the ministry, when his own family went out to seize him, because people were saying he was out of his mind. A little later in that same chapter, his mother and his brothers arrive where he is teaching. They do not go in. They stand outside and send a message to him. And Jesus, sitting in front of a crowd, asks a question that has made people uncomfortable for 2,000 years. He asks who his mother is, and then he looks around at the people sitting on the floor, and he says, "These." That is the only recorded conflict between Mary and her son in all of Scripture, and the only time we see her on the wrong side of a door. It means the woman walking out of Jerusalem this morning is not a plaster saint who agreed with everything. She is a mother who once decided he had gone too far, who came to bring him home, and who was told, in public, that family was no longer going to be measured by blood. Remember that. In about 6 hours it is going to come back. And there is one more thing she had been carrying for over 30 years. At the very beginning, before any of it, Luke says a messenger promised her that her son would be given the throne of his father David, and that of his kingdom there would be no end. A throne. Forever. Hold that too. Because in a few hours, above his head, there is going to be a wooden board with writing on it, and it is going to call him a king. Let me stop the story here, because I want to ask you something. There is a particular kind of pain that has no name in any language I know. It is not the pain of losing something. It is the pain of watching something and being able to do nothing about it. It is standing at a hospital bed. It is the phone call at 3 in the morning. It is loving someone with everything you have and discovering that everything you have is not enough and never was. Mary knew how to fight for this child. She had carried him across a desert to keep him alive. And on this day, she could not lift a finger. Have you ever loved someone through something you could not fix? Not something you failed at. Something you were never given the power to change in the first place. If you have, tell me about it in the comments. Not for the algorithm. Because the woman in this story stood in exactly that place, hour after hour, and the people who understand her best are the ones who have stood there themselves. Now, where was she standing? Here we hit the hardest problem in the whole account, and I am going to lay it in front of you rather than hide it, because it is the most interesting thing on the page. John says she was at the cross. He says that standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. By the cross. Close. Mark, Matthew, and Luke say something different. All three say there were women watching, and all three say they were watching from a distance. And here is the part nobody mentions. In all three of those lists, the mother of Jesus is not named at all. Mark names Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and Salome. Matthew names Mary Magdalene, another Mary, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Luke names no one. None of them names the woman whose son is dying. So which is it? Was she close enough to touch him, or a figure at the edge of a crowd? The honest answer is that we do not know, and that the two accounts may not be describing the same moment. A woman does not stand in one spot for 6 hours. The nearness in John and the distance in the others may be 2 photographs of a long day, taken hours apart. That is a reasonable reading. It is not a proven one, and I will not sell it to you as one. But grant John his scene for a moment, and something happens that most people have never considered. Because the cross was probably not tall. Every painting you have ever seen puts him high up, remote, silhouetted against an enormous sky, far above the heads of the crowd. That image comes from art, not from Rome. The historical evidence, set out most thoroughly by the scholar Martin Hengel, is that Roman crosses were frequently low, the condemned man raised barely off the ground, sometimes not much above the height of a standing person. And that was the point. Crucifixion was not designed to elevate. It was designed to expose the dying man within reach of the crowd, of the insults, of the dogs. Height would have granted him a kind of distance, and Rome had no interest in granting him that. Now put the mother back in the picture. If John is right that she was near, and the historians are right that the cross was low, then this is what her mourning actually was. Her son's face was close to hers, not a shape against the clouds, close enough to see what they had done to him, close enough to see him breathe, close enough that he could turn his head and look at her, which is exactly what John says happened. There was no mercy in that. The distance you see in the paintings would have been a mercy. She did not get it. And above his head, nailed to the wood, there was a board. Pilate had ordered a notice fixed to the cross. The Romans always did, so the crowd would know what the man had been killed for. It was written in 3 languages: Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. And what it said was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Read that as she would have read it. The sentence of the Roman Empire, posted in 3 languages for the whole festival crowd, identified her son by the name of the village where she raised him. Nazareth, her town, the place where she taught him to walk, the place people used as a punchline. It was up there in Latin, above his head, at the eye level of a woman standing at the foot of a low cross. And it called him a king. More than 30 years earlier, she had been told that this child would sit on the throne of David and reign forever. Here was the world's answer, nailed to a board. King of the Jews, written as a joke, posted as a warning. John tells us the chief priests asked Pilate to change the wording. They wanted it to say the man had claimed to be king, not that he was. Pilate refused. He would not alter a syllable. On the one day when everything in her world was being taken apart, the one thing nobody could change was the sign that called her son a king. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh. It was a custom, a rough narcotic given to the condemned to blunt the worst of it. A small, strange mercy from a system that had none. Mark says he would not take it. Sit with that from where she is standing. She watched her son refuse the only thing anyone offered him that would have made it hurt less. And then the noise began. We imagine this scene silent, a hush, the world stopping. The world did not stop. It was Passover, and the execution ground sat beside a public road. Mark says that those who passed by derided him. Ordinary people, going somewhere, who slowed down to insult a dying man and then carried on with their day. He says the chief priests mocked him among themselves. And he says that even the men being crucified next to him joined in. She heard all of it. There is no version of this story in which she did not. She heard strangers laugh at her child. She heard the religious authorities of her own people sneer at him. And she said nothing, not one word. In 4 Gospels, across the whole of that day, Mary is not given a single line. Luke twice tells us, once when the shepherds came, once when she found the boy in the temple, that Mary kept these things and turned them over in her heart. It is a formula, and Luke uses it deliberately. She is the one who watches and holds and does not speak. So the silence at the cross is probably not shock. It is who she is. And on this day, the habit of a lifetime became a torture. One more thing about the noise. Luke records that Jesus prayed for the forgiveness of the men killing him. It is one of the most famous sentences in the Bible. It is also textually disputed, missing from several of the oldest and best manuscripts we possess, present in others. The argument is centuries old, and it is not settled. I tell you that because you deserve to hear it from someone who is not trying to sell you a clean story. There were 2 other men dying beside him, and what happened between them is another place where the Gospels part company. Mark and Matthew both say that both criminals reviled him. Both. No exceptions. Luke says something else, that one mocked and the other turned on him, admitted they deserved what they were getting, and asked Jesus to remember him. And Luke says Jesus answered with a promise. The 2 accounts do not match. Perhaps one man changed his mind over the course of hours. Mark reporting where he started, Luke where he ended. I offer that as a possibility, not a fact. But hold the mother in your mind. If Luke is right, then the last human voice she heard address her son with anything other than contempt, the only one in that whole crowd, on that whole ridge, in that whole day, belonged to a criminal being executed beside him. Not a disciple, not a priest, not a friend. A condemned man a few feet away, dying too. And then, at about midday, the light went out. Mark says darkness came over the whole land from the 6th hour until the 9th. 3 hours, noon until 3 in the afternoon. Now, you have heard somewhere that this was an eclipse. Let us deal with that, because knowing why it is wrong is more interesting than the claim. Passover falls at full moon. That is what Passover is. The calendar is built on it. And a solar eclipse can only happen at new moon, when the moon passes between the Earth and the Sun. A solar eclipse at full moon is not unlikely. It is not rare. It is impossible. So where does the eclipse story come from? It is genuinely ancient, and the way it reaches us tells you a great deal about how history actually works. A 1st century writer named Thales is said to have explained the darkness as an eclipse. But we do not have Thales. We have a 3rd century writer, Julius Africanus, reporting what Thales supposedly wrote. And we do not have Africanus either. His account survives only because a 9th century Byzantine monk quoted him. A report of a report of a report across 800 years, proposing something that could not have happened. I would rather give you that than a mystery I have to inflate. What could it have been? The one natural candidate historians actually raise is the Khamsin, the hot, dry wind that blows off the desert over Judea in exactly these spring weeks, carrying so much dust it turns the sun the color of rust and the sky the color of old iron, sometimes for hours. It is real, it happens there, and it happens then. The text doesn't say that is what it was, and I will not claim that it does. But here is what the text does give us, and it is the part that matters for the woman at the foot of the cross. The darkness did not add anything. It took things away. It took the crowd, because people do not linger on an execution ridge under a sky that has gone wrong. It took the light, and for 3 hours, out of everything that had been stripped from her that day, it took the last thing she had left. It took his face. She had been standing there since morning, unable to touch him, unable to help him, unable to give him water. able to do exactly one thing in the world. Look at him. And then the sky closed, and even that was gone. 3 hours, standing on stone, in the dust and the failing light, in a crowd thinning out around her, beside a man she could no longer see. That is not a gap in the story. That is the story. And then, in the dark, he spoke to her. John says that Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her. And he said to her, "Woman, behold your son." And to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, John says, the disciple took her into his own home. We are so used to hearing this as a tender moment that we have stopped hearing what it is. It is not sentiment. It is survival. In first-century Judea, a woman without a husband depended on her sons. That was not an emotional arrangement. It was the entire economic and legal structure of her life: food, a roof, standing before the law, protection. And all of it ran through the eldest son. Mary was a widow. Her eldest son was being executed as an enemy of Rome. Within a day, she would be a woman with no protector, no income, and no legal shelter in a city that was not hers, attached to a movement that had just been publicly destroyed. And he had brothers. Mark names them James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. They existed. They were adults. Not one of them is at the cross. In any gospel. Anywhere. And John tells us why, flatly and without softening it. His brothers did not believe in him. So the men who should have taken her in were not there. And Jesus, in the last minutes of his life, with the entire apparatus of Roman pain fixed on his body, was solving the practical problem of what would happen to his mother tomorrow morning. He was not making a speech. He was making an arrangement. He was working out where she was going to sleep. And now go back to that day in Galilee, the day she stood outside the house, while he asked the crowd who his mother was, and answered by pointing at the people on the floor. That day she was on the outside of a definition of family that no longer ran through blood. On the cross, he does the same thing again. He redefines family away from blood. Except this time he does it to save her. He hands his mother to a man who is not her son, because faith has become thicker than birth. And she is the one it rescues. The thing that once put her outside the door is the thing that now guarantees she has a door at all. Why John, though? There is a hypothesis, and I label it as one, because that is all it is. Comparing the lists of the women, some scholars propose that John was Mary's nephew, that the man he chose was not a stranger, but the nearest relative who had actually shown up. It cannot be proven, but it is worth knowing. And there is one last thing in that sentence, and it is the reason this video is called what it is called. John mentions the mother of Jesus exactly twice in his entire gospel. Once at a wedding in Cana, at the very beginning, and once here, at the cross, at the very end. And both times, he calls her the same thing. Not mother, woman. At Cana, when she came to him about the wine, he said, "My hour has not yet come." And here, John closes the scene with 4 words. From that hour, the disciple took her home. The hour that had not yet come, at the beginning, has come. And it is her hour, too. The Word opens her story in that gospel, and the Word closes it. Her last recorded words in all of Scripture were spoken at that wedding, to the servants. Do whatever he tells you. She never speaks again. Not here, not ever. Then the darkness lifted, and it ended. Mark says that at the 9th hour Jesus cried out in Aramaic, the language he had learned in her house, asking why God had abandoned him. Did she hear that? Honestly, we cannot be sure. Mark is the gospel that records the cry, and Mark is one of the gospels that puts the women at a distance and does not name her. Whether that voice carried to her, the text does not say, and I am not going to invent an answer. But John records the last two things he said, and if she was where John puts her, she heard them both. I thirst, and then at the very end, it is finished. A mother stood in front of her son hour after hour and could not give him a drink of water. And the second to last thing he ever said aloud was that he was thirsty. And note something about the famous 7 last words from the cross. You will hear them presented as a single sequence, as though someone stood there with a notebook. No single gospel contains all 7. The list is a harmony, a composite, assembled out of 4 separate books by 4 people who each recorded different things. It is a devotional arrangement, and a beautiful one. It is not a transcript. The better question, the one nobody asks, is which of them could she have heard? Not the whole liturgy, just a few. The one where he made sure she would have a home. The one where he said he was thirsty. And the one where he said it was over. There was very little time left, and not for the reason you would expect. Roman practice was to leave the crucified where they hung. That was the design of the punishment. The humiliation continued after death in public for days until the body was gone. Jewish law would not permit it. Deuteronomy is explicit. A man hanged on a tree must be buried the same day. The sun was going down, and this was not an ordinary Sabbath. It was the Sabbath of Passover. So the clock that had spent all day killing her son turned around and became the clock that took his body away from her. And it did take it away from her. This is the part almost nobody knows, and it is the last thing this story does to her. Not one of the 4 Gospels says that Mary received her son's body. The body was given to Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the council who went to Pilate and asked for it, an act of courage and an unusual concession from a Roman governor. Joseph took the body down, helped by Nicodemus, and carried it to a tomb in a garden nearby. And Mark, who is careful about these things, tells us exactly who watched to see where they laid him. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph. The mother of Jesus is not named. Now think about the picture in your head, the image every one of us carries, whether we have ever set foot in a church or not. The mother, seated with the body of her dead son, laid across her knees, holding him one last time. That image is called the Pietà, and it is one of the most powerful things human beings have ever made. Michelangelo carved his version in 1499. The form itself goes back further, to the devotional sculpture of 14th century Germany. It is not in the Bible. It is not in Matthew. It is not in Mark. It is not in Luke. It is not in John. Not one of the 4 accounts places her hands on him after he died. The one thing every human instinct screams that she must have been given: the right to hold her own child. The text never grants her. Somebody else took him down. Somebody else carried him. Somebody else laid him in the tomb, and somebody else watched where they put him. Then the sun set, and the Sabbath began, and everything stopped, and there was nothing more that anyone was permitted to do. She may never have held him at all. The Gospels lose her at that point. She is not at the burial. She is not at the tomb on Sunday morning. She reappears once more in the book of Acts, in an upper room, sitting with the disciples and with her sons, the ones who had not believed and who now do. How she lived out the rest of her life is another story, and we have told it elsewhere. But I want to end here on this ridge, at sundown, because of what this day shows us about her. And it is not what the paintings show us. She could not save him. She had saved him once, when he was small, by carrying him out of the country in the dark. This time there was no border, no escape, nothing to be done. She could not negotiate. She could not intervene. She could not touch him or ease it by 1 degree. Hour after hour, the sum total of what she was able to do for her only son was nothing. And she did not leave. The men who had followed him for 3 years were gone. The men who shared her own blood were somewhere else. The crowd came and mocked and drifted away, and even the sky went out. And the woman who had once stood outside the door, the woman who had once thought he had gone too far, was still standing there when there was nothing left to stand for. She could not fix it. She stayed anyway. And I think that is why this story will not let any of us go. We have built our lives around the idea that love is measured by what it can do. That if we loved well enough, we could fix it, change the outcome. Mary is the proof that this is not true, and that it does not matter. She was given no power to change a single thing on that ridge. And she is the one the world remembers, because when everything love could do had been taken from her, what remained was love that would not go anywhere else. So here is my question, and I mean it for you, personally, tonight. Where in your life are you being asked to stay in something you cannot fix? Not solve, not repair, not win, just stay. Somebody's illness, somebody's grief, a situation that has no good ending and is not going to get one, and where the only thing left in your hands is your presence. Tell me about it below. I read them, and I would rather hear about that than about almost anything else. And if you want to keep walking through this world, this city, these people, and find out what is really there underneath 2,000 years of paint and plaster, then come with us, subscribe, and stay. For 6 hours the world killed her son in front of a crowd, and she was nobody. Nobody in that street knew her name. And 2,000 years later, we are still standing there with her,